thank you. So thank you also to all of you staying for the last talk. So I think content-wise, my paper fits very nicely to the keynote speech and also to Taha's presentation. And I have to say, after these two excellent presentations, I actually got a bit nervous. So I hope it's not going to be too big of a disappointment for you. So actually what I do now is, or what my co-authors and I do in this paper is we take kind of the next step from these mandatory pension contributions to home ownership. So basically we do not ask, should we have nudges, shouldn't we have nudges, but we take these nudges for given, ask how could we design them and what are the implications for individuals' housing choices in a quantitative life cycle model framework. So as a motivation, so I believe here in this room, I don't have to convince you that saving for retirement is clearly among the biggest financial decisions individuals face throughout their lives. And we see that pension systems all around the world struggle with sustaining reasonable levels of benefits for their retirees. So we have the population shift with increasing life expectancies, decreasing birth rates. We were in low interest rate environments and so on, and we really have a policy debate worldwide on how to kind of sustainably reform pension systems. And what we see in several countries around the world, so actually, as David said, basically the US and Canada being the big exception, is we have constant minimum contributions to a retirement savings framework. So we have this in several European countries, we have this in Australia, and as I learned today, we also have it in Chile. So we see that this is a common feature, and this common feature is also what motivated us for our research, because we asked ourselves whether it is taken for granted in several countries around the world that an individual's best retirement savings pattern is a constant share of labor income, and we asked whether there are any alternatives. So what do we do more specifically? So we set up a quantitative life cycle model of optimal consumption savings and housing choices, and we solved this model for two different types of investors. So we solved the model for fully rational individuals, but we also solve it for myopic individuals with a present bias. Because we know we have different types of individuals, we have different sets of preferences, however, kind of governments want to come up with one rule that kind of has positive welfare implications for the majority of their citizens. And then, as a preview of my findings, so what we find is that constant minimum contributions to retirement accounts, they decrease welfare for rational individuals. So this is kind of a mechanic finding, right? If you have a fully rational planner and you impose a constraint, this harms welfare. However, what we find is that for myopic individuals, these constant minimum contributions have actually positive welfare implications. However, we see that for both individuals, constant minimum contributions lead to higher loan-to-value ratios. So this is also what Katja mentioned in questions before. What we see in Australia, that individuals, they accumulate savings in the retirement account while simultaneously having substantial mortgage debt. And so what do we do additionally? So we do not advocate no savings requirement because we clearly see that myopic individuals need some help in building up sufficient savings for retirement, but we ask if there could be a redesign of these policies away from the constant minimum contributions that actually lead to an increase in welfare for both types of investors, rational and myopic. And therefore we propose three schemes. So first of all, we propose age-dependent minimum contributions. So we have contributions increasing with age. So when individuals are young and severely liquidity constrained, they contribute less. However, as they get older, as their income increases, we require them to contribute more to the retirement savings framework. We also allow early withdrawals, so what has been mentioned before. So we do not allow early withdrawals just for the sake of withdrawing money, but we allow that to support the acquisition of a home. And then finally, what we also check is, well, what happens if we impose a total savings target on the individuals? So it is often kind of taken for granted that these savings have to be held in an illiquid account. And while I see all the benefits, it might be also interesting to see, well, what happens for the young liquidity constrained individuals if you give them freedom in their location decisions. So what happens if you actually allow them to also, for example, accumulate liquid savings for the down payment and then kind of helping them to avoid the interest rate margin on mortgage debt. Okay, so just let me go very briefly about the related literature. So I think, there have been so many excellent papers presented and mentioned in this conference. And so I just want to highlight two very recent papers from colleagues of mine who are both at Copenhagen Business School, because we see, like in Denmark, there's also a big policy debate. They also have very rich registry data, which is actually great. And there is a lot of research going on there, and there are two very recent papers that study very related questions to what we do. So first of all, there's this paper by Linda Larsen and Klaus Munk, and they say that individuals who are myopic or not participating in the stock market, they actually benefit from mandatory contributions. So they kind of took the first step to our paper and really said, hey, if individuals lack long-term financial planning skills, if they are not investing in the stock market, we need to help them buy a well-defined, well-designed savings plan. And in the second paper from Katrin Staatsmann and co-authors, they argue, in line with our age-dependent contributions, that we are going to propose that age and wealth-dependent savings requirements might increase individuals' welfare. And so how do we contribute to this literature? So what we do is we really focus also on housing choices. So we study the implications of pension system design and housing choices. And therefore we really model a rent versus own decision, we model mortgages, and as I said, our third contribution here is that we also check, well, how do individuals save if you impose a total savings target, if you give them freedom in their asset location decision, but say, well, you have to obtain a certain level of total savings at every point in time. Okay, so now I've talked already a lot about pension systems, retirement accounts, but let me be a bit more specific. So we've seen many great papers kind of replicating specific pension schemes, replicating 401k plans with their life cycle models and so on. So we take a slightly different approach. So we do not aim to replicate the pension system of a specific country, but we rather try to come up with a model that captures features that can be found in many pension systems worldwide. So, and therefore we focus on defined contribution pension systems, and additionally we assume that retirement accounts are set up as tax-deferred accounts. So we assume that an EET tax regime is valid, which is, for example, in contrast to the Australian system where we have different taxation. So just to let me point out what kind of the preferential tax treatment of these tax-deferred accounts brings, let me compare the tax-deferred retirement account to a conventional bank account to a taxable account. So with the conventional bank account that we also have in our model, so individuals really can decide where to put their money in our model. They make contributions from post-tax income. Their profits are taxed immediately, so they pay a capital gains tax. But whenever they want to withdraw the money, they can do so, and there are no taxes that apply. In the retirement account, we have up to certain limits tax-exempt contributions. So contributions can be made from pre-tax income. The savings accumulate tax-free, and then the withdrawals are taxed like regular income. So, but now we come to this point that has also been mentioned several times today. The thing is, well, if you just look at the preferential tax treatment, you might ask yourself, well, why do I then not put all my money in the tax-deferred account? So the problem is that generally prior to attaining retirement age, withdrawals from this tax-deferred retirement account are not possible or subject to heavy penalty taxes. So, and this plays also a crucial role then in our results, is that we really have this important difference by having the illiquidity of the retirement account prior to attaining retirement age. Okay, so now let me come to our model. So what do we aim to do, and how does the model roughly look like? So with our model, we aim to identify the impact of constant minimum contribution requirements to tax-deferred retirement accounts, on individuals' housing choices. So we compare two settings with each other to achieve this goal. So in the first setting, individuals face constant minimum contribution requirements. So at every point in time, they're forced to contribute a constant share of their labor income to the retirement account. And then just to see what happens if we do not impose any savings requirement, we check, okay, what happens if we let them choose their contribution completely freely? And we have two financial markets in our model. So we have the housing market and we have the capital market. So on the housing market, we model a rent versus own decision. So individuals can either live in a rented place or an owner-occupied home. So we do not allow for housing investments just for the sake of having kind of housing as an asset but not living in the home. So we model owner-occupied homes. And therefore, we also assume that they serve a dual role as an asset and a durable consumption good, meaning that via the asset channel, individuals expose themselves to changes in the home's value, and via the consumption good channel, they also derive utility from living in the owner-occupied home. And then we also model recurring and non-recurring costs. So the recurring costs simply reflecting the rent rate for renters or the maintenance costs for owners. And the non-recurring costs are just transaction costs that occur whenever acquiring an owner-occupied home. And then on the capital market and our second financial market in our model, individuals face an asset allocation decision. So they can decide whether they want to invest in a risky asset, representing a stock market index, or a risk-free asset. They can use their own, so homeowners can use their owner-occupied home as a collateral and can borrow up to 80% of the home's value. However, renters do not have any borrowing opportunities, so we do not allow for borrowing against human capital. And now, basically, we have all the ingredients needed to set up our optimization problems. So individuals make decisions in order to maximize their expected present discounted lifetime utility, so classical life cycle model framework. And I just put our objective function there. So just to highlight a few features, so I will just talk you through the key components that I would like to mention, that you get an idea which dynamics we aim to capture with our model. So first of all, our individuals make 6 interrelated decisions at every point seven interrelated decisions at every point in time simultaneously to achieve their goal of maximizing their utility. So they decide upon their consumption level, they decide upon their contributions to, prior to attaining retirement age, and withdrawals from after attaining retirement age from the retirement account. They face an asset allocation decision in both accounts, so they decide how much to invest into stocks and bonds in the taxable and the tax deferred account. They decide upon their home size, and they finally also decide upon their home ownership status, so they decide whether they want to be renters or owners. Yes?
So it's CT divided by 1 plus I to the power T. What is the 1 plus I to the power
The inflation rate.
Okay.
Because taxation plays a crucial role here, so that's why I discount. Okay, yeah, so then we have Epstein-Sim preferences to allow for the separation between risk aversion and elasticity of intertemporal substitution. We have a Koch-Douglas utility function over consumption and housing, and we also have a preference shifter here for individuals' preferences for housing. So this parameter theta here, if it's higher than 1, we account for individuals having a preference for living in an owner-occupied home instead of a rented place. And if it's smaller than 1, then individuals actually get a discount from living in an owner-occupied home and prefer to be renters. And I mean, what we see is for several individuals, or for the majority, this theta is going to be larger than 1. However, we are currently, trying to set up a model where we account for heterogeneous types of investors, and to come up with realistic homeownership rates in these models, we explicitly have to account for also individuals' preferences of not participating in the housing market. And
let me celebrate the fact that you're separating risk and time preferences, because you have this non-additive specification that I've been begging for in many other presentations. The pity is you've used Epstein-Zinn, which has the two decal risk preferences for atemporal risk, which has been roundly, profoundly, widely rejected as a specification of atemporal preferences. There are some very, very simple technical alternatives. I'll send you a paper on that. But celebration for separating out the risk and type preferences, so that's good to see.
Thank you, and also thank you for the paper with the innovation.
We've all added. He sent it to all of us.
Epstein-Zinn,
In our career, we all have to read that paper. You'll go through that.
I'm one of the referees that mentions his own paper, so that's...
Yeah, and then finally, we also have mortality risk in our model. And I mean, for sure, this is subject to various budget constraints, but in this talk, I'd rather want to focus on the economic dynamics and not put like a full optimization problem up here. Yes?
Is there, does the home size change with you? And do I sometimes rent and sometimes own? And so that is that very variable?
Yes, so I mean, we have time is annual, so individuals could decide in every period if they want to adjust or not. But we have transaction costs on becoming when and buying a new owner-occupied home, and these transaction costs lead to no trade regions of individuals. So actually, I think I don't have the plot here, but if we take a look at the moving frequency, we actually get quite realistic moving frequencies. So young individuals are renters, then they enter the housing market, buy a rather small home, and then they maybe move once or twice to a bigger home, but kind of their housing investment is rather sticky.
And the uncertainties is just lifetime uncertainty, or is there house price uncertainty?
Yes, so I will come to that actually on the next slide where we have our calibration. So we have several risk factors. So stock prices are, so our risk is exogenously given, but stock prices are stochastic, house prices are stochastic, individuals prior to attaining retirement age face labor income risk, and they also have mortality risk. So we choose our preference parameters to match empirically observed growth of wealth in OECD countries. So basically we calculate an average growth of wealth for all OECD countries, and we aim to match that with the choice of our preference parameters. We set the financial market parameters to historical estimates, and we use a bunch of empirical estimates from literature, for example, for housing market parameters, the dependent structure, so correlation between stocks, labor, income, and housing. And we also follow the structure that Koch and Koch first proposed for the labor income process prior to retirement age, but we updated using more recent data. And this, in case you're not familiar with this specification of the labor income process, it means that labor income is stochastic, but it's composed out of a deterministic component that's a polynomial function out of individuals' age and educational attainment and family composition, and then there are shocks to it. Yes?
I mean, I know there's already a lot of things in the model. It's a very, very rich model. But like, what is the assumption you're making about the supply of rentals and homes, and are prices fixed? Okay.
There's unlimited supply, and prices are stochastic, but they don't follow any time frame. So I agree that endogenous house prices would be very nice, but
There's some sort of supply elasticity, because that would attenuate, if a lot of people now want to buy, then price of rental are going to go down.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be fully microfunded, but you could just have,
yeah, would be definitely interesting to have. And then, as we are interested in how contributions to retirement systems can be best implemented, we require our individuals to fund their retirement benefits by drawing down their own savings, but we impose a withdrawal constraint on them, kind of mimicking that in several countries. Individuals are forced to annuitize their retirement savings. However, this was also criticized by some referees, so we also kind of estimate a replacement rate using only Social Security income for individuals to then kind of only force them to fund their on top of Social Security benefits by drawing down their own savings, and our results qualitatively don't change much. Then we assume that borrowers face an interest rate margin, so the interest rate applicable to mortgage debt exceeds the risk-free rate. we set the taxes to the top tax rates in the US, and in case of constant minimum contributions, we require individuals to contribute 12.4% of their labor income. And this is actually a rather low number. So for example, in the Netherlands, I currently contribute more than 17% of my labor income. And I mean, if we increase this number, our results get stronger. So here we are rather on the conservative side. Okay, so now solving this model analytically is impossible, so we solve it numerically, we use backward induction, then we get value functions and policy functions, and I will now, in the first step, talk about welfare effects by comparing value functions, so by comparing expected present discounted lifetime utility, and then on the next slide, you will see some simulation results on our optimal policy functions. So as I've already said, we calculate the welfare effects by comparing expected present discounted lifetime utilities. So we compare the value functions at age 20. And what we find is that for rational individuals, constant minimum contributions have significant welfare costs of about 5%. But for myopic individuals, individuals have about 1.9% welfare gains under constant minimum contributions. And you will also see this in the simulation results later. So what really drives the welfare losses of individuals when they're not subject to any savings requirement, well, they really procrastinate on building up retirement savings, and then they have a sharp consumption drop. So they really screw up on their consumptions moving over the life cycle. And also they underinvest into housing when they're young. And so we assume that there is a average positive house price return. So they also forego kind of this asset appreciation of their house.
So I must have missed it, but myopic is what?
So a present bias.
Oh, just a beta less than 1.
Sorry?
A beta less than 1. You're calling that myopic,
Yes.
and that's irrational.
Yes.
Okay. No, I just didn't. No problem. No, keep going. I just didn't understand.
No,
The
sorry.
word rational can mean a million different things.
Yeah, I fully agree.
I can rationalize
So-
probability weighting. I can rationalize beta.
Yeah.
You know, I just needed to know. That was a
Yeah, no,
clarification.
here we assume a lack of long-term planning skills, present bias, too much weight on
Okay.
current consumption. Yeah, and then building up on that, so now we see that there are quite contrasting results. So irrational individuals, they're really harmed by these constant minimum contributions, whereas the myopic individuals, they actually benefit. So what we then also ask ourselves is, well, can we come up with a scheme that's less welfare harming for rational individuals while it still helps our myopic individuals? Okay, so, but before I come to the alternatives, let me also show you some simulation results. So what we see here now is the average of 10,000 simulated paths on the optimal policy functions that we obtain. And what's depicted by the black line are the results for constant minimum contributions, and what's depicted by the red dashed line are the results for no minimum contribution requirements. And now what we see here is that individuals not subject to minimum contributions, they accumulate lower savings than individuals facing the contribution requirement, and we see that this is mainly channeled through the lower accumulation of retirement savings. So young and typically severely liquidity constrained individuals, they really procrastinate on building up sufficient savings for retirement, and thus then also end up with a lower level of total savings. However, with these constant minimum contributions, we also see that individuals have substantially higher loan-to-value ratios. So now what happens if we take a look here at the black line is that individuals who are already liquidity constrained are forced to make contributions to the retirement account. If we take a look here at the middle panel, so they cannot make such a large down payment as the individuals not facing contribution requirements, and they can also only repay their mortgage at a slower rate, essentially really leading to them being harmed by the interest rate margin on mortgage debt. So now this is kind of the first set of results, but I would also like to show you a second set of simulation results, mainly for the two decision variables that really drive our welfare effect. So consumption and housing services are the two decision variables that directly affect our utility, so I'd also like to show them here. So this is what I already briefly mentioned before. So individuals not subject to minimum contributions, they consume too much when they are young, but then they're really hit hard by not having accumulated sufficient savings by having substantially lower consumption levels during retirement age. And we also see that when they're young, they really underinvest into housing. So when they're older, they kind of obtain a roughly similar level of housing services, but when they're young, they really underinvest into housing.
They end up in the same funeral home.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what we also see is that they get on the property ladder later. So because we see that they overconsume so much, they get utility from non-durable consumption, so they also not build up so many liquid savings as, for example, rational planners, and then they also enter the housing market later. Okay, so now this was kind of the set of base case results, and now in the last 10 minutes I would like to talk about some alternative schemes. So up to now I hope that I've convinced you that some form of savings requirement is important, in particular for myopic individuals, but we see that it really has severe consequences also for the rational individuals, and it's a policy discussion whether rational individuals should be harmed just to help the purpose ones. And so we try to contribute to this debate by proposing 3 different schemes, and when I show you the results, you will see that these results actually, there are still constraints for rational individuals, however, they are less welfare harming than the constant minimum contribution.
Just a clarification, in your control, in the basic model, do you have a mixture of myopic and non-myopic people, or are you assuming all myopic or all?
So what I've shown you now was all myopic, and I have the same set of results for all rational. Okay,
so it'd be interesting to see if you've got, let's say, 50% of each.
Yes.
And there are certain budget constraints that need to be met, and this is related to some points earlier that
Yes.
David was making. There can be spillovers across the types.
Yeah, this is actually what I'm also currently working on, because right now we also assume there's one calibration, right?
Sure.
There's one risk aversion, one time preference, and so on. And for sure, this captures not the whole society.
Got it.
Yes?
Sorry, I think just one with this, to make sure we understand, myopic here means that your intertemporal discount rate is non-zero. Is that the definition of myopic?
It's beta is less than 1.
So anyone with beta less than 1 would be myopic here.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. But that would mean that in a world without anything, and a positive interest rate, the optimal consumption plan should be rising.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
Well, not to big T. It will decline.
Yes.
But over
Without
the
mortality, yes.
So
absolutely right. Yeah, over the life most of life.
It should be rising, right? And then when you decumulate, it does not necessarily.
Yes, and for a social planner here, if you subtract from a lot of from mortality and everything, you would want replacement rates ratios above 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is also this paper of Koch and Schlafmann and Koch, what I mentioned before. What they do is they actually aim to replicate the Swedish pension system, and their goal is to keep replacement rates constant. So for them, what you just mentioned, this is actually their main objective. So they aim to come up with contribution rates such that they keep constant replacement rates. So what we have here are now age-dependent minimum contributions. So this is inspired by Swiss occupational pension plans, where individuals who are young and liquidity constrained, they are not forced to contribute. So think in Swiss occupational pension plans up to the age of 25, you're not forced to make any minimum contributions, but it raises up to 18% when you are between, I think, ages 60 and 65, so shortly before attaining retirement age. Then the second thing we're looking at are early withdrawals to acquire real estate. So here we kind of soften this liquidity constraint of the retirement account, and we allow individuals to take out money when it is for the acquisition of a home. So we do not allow borrowing against the retirement account, but we let them take money out when you buy a home, but they're also not allowed to take out more than the value of the home. And then finally, we have our flexible retirement savings scheme where we impose a total savings target on the individuals, but we give them freedom on whether they accumulate their savings in the taxable account, in the retirement account, or via home equity. So now, to take a look at the results. So my results presentation here is structured in a similar way as before. So first of all, we take a look at value function comparisons. We're taking a look at the welfare effect. And afterwards, I again have 2 slides with simulation results. So what we see here now is welfare effects in comparison to constant minimum contributions. So if you see a positive number, this means that a certain scheme improves welfare in comparison to constant minimum contributions. And we only have positive numbers here indicating that for both myopic and rational individuals, all 3 alternative savings schemes lead to an increase in welfare in comparison to constant minimum contributions. So with this welfare effect analysis, we already tick a few boxes of what we aim to achieve with our alternatives. So we still help the myopic individuals. We even help them more in terms of welfare. And I mean, I said we had about 5% welfare loss for rational individuals under constant minimum contributions. So that means that here we still have welfare losses for the rational individuals in comparison to no contribution requirement. Again, we still have to be aware we impose a constraint on a fully rational individual, so this reduces their expected present and discounted lifetime utility. However, we see that we really alleviate the welfare burden of the constant minimum contributions by between 2.5 to 4.5%. Okay, so and now once again a set of simulation results, again for our myopic individuals. So I also have the set of results for the rational individuals, and I agree maybe already for my next presentation I will try to mix the 2 sets of investors. And now what we see here are again full life cycle profiles. And the black line is the black line that you have seen before. So the black line are results for constant minimum contribution requirements. And then we have 3 different lines for the 3 different alternative savings schemes. So green for age-dependent contributions, red for the withdrawal opportunity, blue for the flexible scheme. And now if you think this is a horrible graph, I cannot see anything. The lines are very close to each other. Well, actually, I think it's a good thing that these lines are close to each other because this means that the alternative savings schemes do a good job in helping to obtain a similar level of total savings. Yes?
What is the unit in the y-axis for this 3,000 mean?
So we just, when we solve the optimization problem, we normalize with total wealth. So we say they start with an artificial wealth level of 100, and basically this is the growth factor. So their wealth grows about factor 33 throughout their life cycle. But I agree, we could also report here US dollars. But we
wealth to income or something.
Yes.
That would make it easier to.
Yes. But basically what's kind of the key takeaway is the wealth grows from 100 to about 3,300. This is a growth factor of 33, and this is also the growth factor we see on average wealth in OECD countries from age 20 to age 65. And yeah, then if we take a look at the middle panel, we again have the evolution of retirement savings, and we see here that even though they now obtain a very similar level of total savings, they still, when they are young and liquidity constrained, they make use of other savings mechanisms. So we see that when they get older, they start making catch-up contributions to the retirement account to benefit from the preferential tax treatment. But when they are young, they still postpone accumulating savings in the retirement account. The only exception being here for the withdrawal opportunity. So then when they are really young, they actually contribute a lot to the retirement account because they then have the tax-free accumulation of savings, but then they very early enter the housing market and take the money out of the retirement account. When we have the full illiquidity constraint on the retirement account, they still start contributing to the retirement account later. And now, if we take a look at the loan-to-value ratios, we see that all three alternatives decrease individuals' loan-to-value ratios. I mean, for sure, we see that individuals subject to the flexible scheme have the lowest loan-to-value ratio, which is a very intuitive result, because under the flexible scheme, where we impose a total savings target, individuals actually can meet their savings target while repaying their mortgage. So for them, it's a rational thing to very quickly repay the mortgage, because on the one hand, they avoid the interest rate margin on the mortgage debt, and on the other hand, they also help themselves meeting their total savings target. But also for the other alternatives, we see that individuals' loan-to-value ratios are lower. And now if we take a look again at the decision variables that directly affect our utility, we have here the consumption level. We see, well, still there is a bit of lower consumption during the retirement phase, but the gap is not as big as before, where individuals did not have any savings requirements. And if we take a look at housing wealth, we see that, okay, when they're young, they're still underinvesting into housing, but actually then they start to even invest more into housing as they get older. And now, if you might ask yourself, okay, here with this red line, with the withdrawal opportunity, they really have the chance, to invest into a bigger house rather early, because they can access their retirement savings to finance their home. And then finally, what we also see is that individuals who want to get on the property ladder, they can get on the ladder earlier with these different alternative savings schemes. Okay, so I think I have 2 minutes left if I read the clock correctly. Or 3 minutes.
You've got
But
three and a half.
I need new glasses, so. But I'm on the last slide, so I think I will make it on time. So what I've shown you now is, first of all, the impact of constant minimum contribution requirements on individuals' housing choices. And what we see is that constant minimum contributions increase loan-to-value ratios, because they lead to individuals effectively paying to borrow their own money. So they have savings, they're locked up in the retirement account, they cannot access them, and then they face the interest rate margin on mortgage debt. And additionally, they are welfare harming for rational individuals. And then what I've presented you just on the recent slides were 3 alternative savings schemes. So age-dependent contributions, early withdrawals, and the flexible scheme. And they lead to a similar level of total savings. They largely alleviate the unintended side effects of constant minimum contributions, and they are, in comparison to constant minimum contributions, welfare improving for both the rational and the myopic individuals. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Marlene from HSC, and thank you for having me as your discussant. It was actually a really nice paper to read. Very rich model, like somebody mentioned already before, very interesting topic. So essentially what the paper does is it provides a comparison of different pension schemes. So we have the baseline pension scheme is there's no regulation, so we optimize, or Marlene and her co-authors optimize a model where there is no imposition on minimum requirements, or no minimum requirements for contribution. Then in the first step, they compare what the standard minimum contribution requirements would look like, what the outcomes will be, the implications of that in terms of, well, in the end, the goal is in terms of welfare, but in the meantime also for retirement savings, total wealth, loan-to-value ratios, etc. And I see this paper, so a comparison of pension schemes looks to me like a paper that kind of aims to inform some policy discussion. So for countries who have to make a decision, how does the optimal policy scheme look like? And therefore I thought a good approach to start with that would be to look at the advantages and disadvantages of all the schemes. And you've done a great job in the paper basically to show the figures where you can see for each individual component how do they compare to each other, the schemes. But my first super minor comment, it's so minor that it's not even in the slide as a point, is I think I would like, for instance, an appendix table with just a summary of the advantages and disadvantages, just for somebody who just, flips through the paper and has like a little overview of what is what. So we see that constant minimum contribution requirements, they lead to higher retirement savings, and so here was the terminology a little bit that the disadvantages, one of them is that it challenges consumption smoothing over the life cycle. So what is meant here is essentially that while they aim at increasing consumption during retirement, they do decrease consumption relative to no regulation in the early years. So this was basically like in the early 30s or before 30, the 30s. But yeah, so that is one of the disadvantages, that we have less consumption in the early years. And they do have higher loan-to-value ratios. So that is a clear disadvantage that is discussed. Then in comparison to those constant minimum contribution requirements, we see first the early withdrawal to acquire homeownership. So it allows to withdraw early from that account to acquire homeownership. Here we have, although we have the same pattern of total wealth essentially and the same levels, we have lower loan-to-value ratios, we have a welfare gain. The same holds for the age-dependent contributions, although here is the highest welfare gain. And you see there's no disadvantages listed here right now. I'll come back to that. This might be incomplete. This will be one of my points as well. And then we have the flexible scheme, which has the lowest loan-to-value ratio, and it has also a welfare gain in comparison to the constant minimum contribution requirements. Here, a clear disadvantage is that if you actually want to implement this in a country, you need to have very detailed information about individuals' wealth. And again, here might be something else as well that I'll come back to later. Another point is that they also observe what is basically the optimal age of homeownership or housing market entry. And here is basically the comparison of all of the different schemes. Here, one minor word on the side. So I think you sometimes say this scheme enables us to, or enables them to buy houses earlier and so on. But I wouldn't even see early housing or early homeownership as a positive. I think essentially those ages are the optimal age to get into the housing market depending on the scheme, right? So I would look at this a little bit more neutral. That's why I didn't put it in the advantage-disadvantage section. So my first question or first comment, and my comments are essentially, because I saw that they already have an R&R, so I structured my comments essentially in the way that, well, either you can use super minor changes in your R&R already, because you will not implement any major changes in addition to the referee report realistically, or it's for future research. So yeah, what we see, where do we see that alternative schemes have a higher poverty risk at retirement? So this is a statement that comes in the paper a couple of times, and this would be one of the disadvantages, hugely important disadvantage of the two or the three schemes that we have seen. I could not see where this comes out in the model or where basically that statement is based on. So if you give that statement, I think it has to be discussed a little bit more. So where do we see that in the model? Is it implemented? Is it an outcome? What is going on here? The second is another disadvantage of the flexible scheme that's not discussed is, yes, it requires a lot of details on wealth, but it also requires a lot of oversight and literacy on the individual's part, on the household essentially. Because if you describe it in a way that they label at the end of the year, they label all of their assets as savings. So for instance, if the house increases in value, that could be labeled as savings. If they make contributions to some account, that could be labeled as savings. So that doesn't only mean that all of this information has to be transparent and go through the government, but also it means that the individual has to be capable of making these decisions and basically have an overview of their own finances and their own cash flows, etc. Which is also not necessarily always the case. So then the next point is, you mentioned across the paper here and there a little bit, this also holds for like the poorest percentile and so on. I think it would be nice if you had some kind of consistent heterogeneity analysis in terms of income groups. Especially we talked before also a little bit about shifting, should actually the rational individuals, so let's say the rational non-liquidity constrained individuals pay for the poorest ones. I think that's how you phrase it. So it would be nice to look at the wealth quantiles and to see what's going on in which groups. After all, we're more interested in helping the poor ones save, I guess. And then the next one is housing wealth. or housing wealth and also loan-to-value ratios are compared conditional on homeownership, which means that if we look at, for instance, the loan-to-value figure, we only look at, let's say broadly, the richer ones, right? Because the ones who are so liquidity constrained that they can't actually get a house, they're not even in there. So we don't know what these are consequences only for the ones who already have bought a home. So what does the extensive margin look like? Are all the people buying a house eventually? I imagine not. So maybe that would also, just a word or two on the extensive margin would be great. Then I'm not an expert on the housing literature, I have to say, but I'm wondering, is there any empirical literature on the interplay between housing and retirement? So are there any natural experiments? Or if not, we know that the schemes are implemented in a few countries. Could you give some kind of anecdotal evidence, like these are the housing market entry ages in those countries, these are, like just comparisons to see how does your model reflect that, or does it reflect that? Then for future research, I think modeling family planning decisions is kind of essential here, because that is one of the major determinants of also buying a home, right? And also a determinant of the home size. So if you have kids, you might need a bigger home. Like a lot of people buying homes when they have kids. Not looking at
Not looking at anybody, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
He's just getting a fridge today. I mean, it's like this.
And there are other determinants maybe as well. Bequest also is, you say that in your paper also that home is more bequeathed than actually consumed. So how does that reflect? Future research again, like I don't think you can do anything of that in the R&R. Then one point, if we have the age-dependent contribution scheme and we have also, as we know, usually age-increasing labor income, that would lead, because the contributions are a share of labor income, that would lead to like an exponentially higher amount of income paid as a contribution, which could also challenge those who have more financial responsibilities when they're older because they have kids. So for that reason, I think it might make sense also to consider family planning. Okay, I have no time anymore. Also, what do young adults do before they acquire a home? Do they rent or do they live with their parents? Because that could be interesting if they actually live with their parents. Your parents are not going to say, okay, now that you buy your own home, instead of paying for the house here, I'm going to contribute to your retirement plan. So there's actually like a shift in funds going on into generational, because the parents, might have paid for the home in advance. And then there's just a few comments on the model. So if I was a referee, I'd probably ask for a few robustness checks, because I'm just going to pick out maybe 2 comments here. So are the housing prices, the assumptions that you have, they're reasonable? I think the housing prices were pretty volatile over the last years, and I think the standard deviation that you're using are from a citation in 1989 or so. So like it could be to dig into this a little bit more. Then maybe for future research in your model, my question is, you have those the present bias and the effect that this has basically in the certain retirement schemes on all of the outcomes that you look at. My question is, how does, for instance, uncertainty over your expected lifetime work? Like, if you underestimate your expected lifetime, does it have the same effect on outcomes? Like, of course, not the same mechanism, but maybe the same effect on outcomes, or that could be also interesting to look at. I'm out of time, so I'll just give you that slide, and I kind of categorize them for this R&R and for future research, so you can look at this after. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent discussion. So I really like, that the comments are already clustered. So that's really good.
That's what happens when you work with Irina.
Your life gets ordered and structured. Yeah.
And actually you mentioned a few points we're currently working on. So we're, for example, currently working on heterogeneous investors, also having robustness checks on different parameter calibration. How does it play a role? So we're working on several points that you mentioned, and I really like this family planning aspect. But for sure, this is then for the next paper. So overall, thank you for all of these excellent comments.
Great. Do we have more questions? Yeah, we're good.
Every journal that asks me for an R&R, it's major revisions, and you'll be lucky if we review it again. So, congratulations.
Awesome. Well, it's a wrap.
Yeah.